All right, guys. So I left you off with having completed the SPACECAT worksheet, and I promised you that we would go over it and the expectations and what you should have completed. So what I have here is I have pre-color coded the SPACECAT sheet here on the right, and I have the text we were working with on the left, and I'm going to do a live walkthrough of how to go through this text. Now, the first thing that I would do is what we did in class is I would break down exactly what it's asking me to break down. The second thing that I would do is just do a read through this passage. No annotating, no marking, nothing, just read through it. So that's what I'm going to do to begin. I'm happy and flattered to be a guest of honor on this always exciting and challenging occasion. But looking over this audience tonight, I am less happy than you might think and more challenged than you could know. I stand here at this rostrum, invited to throw rocks at you. You have asked me to tell you what's wrong with you, the American press. The subject not only is of great national significance, but also has, one should say, infinite possibilities and infinite perils to the rock thrower. For the banquet seeker who criticizes the weaknesses and pretensions or exposes the follies and sins of his listeners, and at their invitation does not generally evoke an enthusiastic, no less a friendly response. The delicate art of giving an audience hell is always one best left to the Billy Grahams and the Bishop Sheens. But you are an audience of journalists. There is no audience anywhere who should be more bored, indeed more revolted, by a speaker who tried to fawn on it, butter it up, exaggerate its virtues, play down its faults, and who would more quickly see through any attempt to do so. I ask you only to remember that I am not a volunteer for this subject tonight. You asked for it. For what is good journalism all about? On a working, finite level, it is the effort to achieve illuminating candor in print and to strip away cant. It is the effort to do this not only in matters of state, diplomacy, and politics, but also in every smaller aspect of life that touches the public interest or engages proper public curiosity. It is the effort to explain everything from a summit conference to why the moon looks larger coming over the horizon than it does when it has fully risen in the heavens. It is the effort, too, to describe the lives of men and women, big and small, close at hand or thousands of miles away, familiar in their behavior or unfamiliar in their idiosyncrasies. It is, to use the big word, the pursuit of and the effort to state the truth. No audience knows better than an audience of journalists that the pursuit of truth and the articulation of it is the most delicate, hazardous, exacting, and inexact of tasks. Consequently, no audience is more forgiving, I hope, to the speaker who fails or stumbles in his own pursuit of it. The only failure this audience could never excuse in any speaker would be the failure to try to tell the truth, as he sees it, about his subject. In my perilous but earnest effort to do so here tonight, I must begin by saying that if there is much that is wrong with the American press, there is also much that is right with it. I know, then, that you will bear with me, much as it may go against your professional grain, if I ask you to accept some of the good with the bad, even though it may not make such good copy for your newspaper. For the plain fact is that the U.S. daily press today is not inspiringly good. It is just far and away the best press in the world. Now, once you've read through this text, you have the basic comprehension, the ability to then do a little more digging with it. I do want to make one note, though. We read here Billy Graham's and the Bishop Sheens, and there was a little asterisk here. This means, this indicates that there is a note, an explanatory note, and that'll be at the end of the text, which we see here. So Billy Graham, an American Christian evangelist, and Fulton John Sheen, an American Catholic archbishop, both became renowned for their religious oratory. Their speeches were widely broadcast on radio or television. So here, Luce is alluding to the work of these two people to illuminate her point, right? Now, as we start, I think the best way to go about this particular task, I wouldn't normally ask you to color code your text because we do have a set form of annotation that you'll learn in the coming weeks. But the easiest way to do this particular task is to go through color by color or piece by piece and find what speaks to which aspect of SPACECAT. So we're going to start with speaker, which you can see on the right I have marked in red, and we're looking for who is the speaker writer, what do we know about them, what can you tell, or what do you know about the speaker that helps you understand the point of view expressed. So we'll start with some of the obvious details. Now, I think the speaker is the easiest one to do because of this excerpt that's in the beginning. So this little tidbit of information that we had talked about yesterday in class. So I'm going to look in here for information about the speaker, right? So passage below, opening to a speech made by American journalist and politician Clare Luce, right? This tells us exactly who this person is and what their position is. That's a great start. Now, Luce, in this speech, Luce went on to criticize the tendency of the American press to sacrifice journalism. We know that she's going to criticize something, which is something that will come in handy later. Now, that's the extent of the obvious information here. However, we have the benefit of the fact that this is written in first person. So I'm happy and flattered to be a guest of honor in this exciting opportunity, but I'm less happy than you might think and more challenging you might know. I stand here at this rostrum invited to throw rocks at you. Now, when she uses this phrase, invited to throw rocks at you, what do you think that means? Well, in this case, or in any case, really, if you say, like, if you're talking about throwing rocks at somebody, it means that, you're inciting some negative thing, right? So you're picking the things that are wrong with somebody. Now, she goes on to say, you have asked me to tell you what's wrong with you, the American press. Now, she's emphasizing this. That italics means that it's emphasized. So think about when somebody says, you did this to me, right? So there's a sense of she's kind of playing around with what they've invited her to do. So I'm going to underline or to highlight in red this this whole sentence. You have asked me to tell you what's wrong with you, the American press. And this will definitely be useful later on. But this sentence tells us she is able to kind of like make jokes and stress, right? Imagine somebody giving this speech like, hey, you said to do this, right? And you kind of laugh at it because they're like, yeah, we did. Now, if we go over here where we read, she does a similar thing. So consequently, no audience is more forgiving, I hope, right? This insert of I hope does a similar thing, right? Like she's about to make fun of these people. She's like, well, I hope you're forgiving. And that tells us about something about her because not only is she this journalist and this politician, she's criticizing other journalists, right? But she's doing it in a way that it's picking on the fact that they asked her to do this. Again, if you look over here, line 25, you asked for it. So it says, I am not a volunteer for this subject tonight. You asked for it. So she has many of these interjections that show her humorous side. And that does tell us something about the speaker because it means that she's not taking it. She's not taking this matter in a heavy way, even though it's a serious topic, right? It's not a comedy approach or anything like this. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch colors. Hopefully. I'm going to go ahead and switch colors because now we're going to talk about purpose. So what is the writer hoping to accomplish? What is the reason behind this piece? And what do they want the audience to do after having listened? Now, purpose and this message that we see up here are more or less the same, right? The message will mirror the author's purpose, because obviously the message is what they're delivering, what they want us to do. Purpose, why are they delivering this, right? So what is the speaker hoping to accomplish? So we'll start with this top part. So Luce went on to criticize the tendency of the American press to sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of perceived public demand for sensationalist stories. Okay, we know that, she is going to criticize this thing, right? We're looking for what is the speaker hoping to accomplish. So let's start with this introduction. I'm happy and flattered to be a guest of honor. That's always exciting and challenging occasion. But looking over this audience tonight, I'm less happy than you might think. I stand here. You invited me. The subject not only is of great national significance, but also has, one should say, infinite possibilities and infinite perils to the rock thrower. For the banquet speaker who criticizes the weakness and pretensions or exposes the follies and sins of his listeners, even at their invitation, does not generally evoke an enthusiastic, no less friendly response. Delicate art of giving audience. Okay, so this is just her describing a speaker who tried to fawn on. So she starts talking about what is good journalism. So she's still priming them for her message. Now here, in my perilous but earnest effort to do so here tonight, I must begin by saying that if there is much wrong with the American press, there is much good. Only know that you will bear with me. I know then that you will bear with me, much as might go. Pressure again. I ask you accept some of the good and the bad. So she's going to indicate some of the bad things. For the plain fact, the U.S. press today is not inspiringly good. It's the best in the world. So what is it that she's actually trying to get across? Well, there's not one phrase that you can kind of look to, that you could look to kind of indicate this. But I think the closest thing we can get is the only failure this audience could never excuse any speaker would be the failure to try to tell the truth as he sees the subject. So failure to try to truth as he sees the subject. I'm going to underline this with purpose because what Luce is trying to do, as we indicated up here, is she's criticizing the tendency of the American press to sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of sensationalist stories. Now, sensationalist stories are these clickbait stories, right? The stories that aren't really true, but they get a lot of people to read them. And so what she's trying to do is to get people to get these journalists to understand the importance of, telling the truth, right? She wants them as journalists to report the facts as facts and avoid doing the sensationalist aspects. This purpose aspect, while we do have some evidence that we can make an argument for what her purpose is or what her message is, there's no clear, hey, here it is in big black letters. No, it doesn't exist like that. So you have to make an inference. So when we go to fill in our chart on purpose, we would put something along the lines of, she wants journalists to tell the truth as they see it about the subject, and to avoid sensationalist stories, right? That could be what we put here for purpose. But I think that's all the evidence, all the pertinent evidence that we could really put in this section. Now, I'm going to go ahead and change colors again. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Okay. And we're going to move to audience. So audience, who is the speaker? Who is the speaker writer trying to reach? How do we know? Do they indicate a specific audience? What assumptions exist in the text about the intended audience? First of all, the speaker, who they're speaking to is really clear, right? Two journalists at the Women National Press Club. We're given a very specific, actually, I'm just going to highlight two journalists because the Women's National Press Club will come into play a little bit later. So I'm honored to be guest of honor. Actually, in side note, you could actually in red have put, you could have highlighted guest of honor in red for speaker. Okay, guest of honor, always exciting, challenging occasion, but looking over this audience tonight, I'm less happy. Infinite possibilities, banquet speaker who criticizes the weaknesses and pretensions to expose the follies and sins of his listener, even an invitation. You are an audience of journalists. Whoa, it doesn't get clearer than that. There's no audience anywhere should be more bored, indeed more revolted by speaker who tried to fawn on, butter it up, exaggerate its viruses, and play down its faults, but who would more quickly see through than attempt to do so. So she's saying, I'm going to highlight all of this for the audience. There is no audience anywhere who should be more bored, indeed more revolted by a speaker who tried to fawn on, butter it up, exaggerate its virtues, play down its faults, who would be more quickly to see through it and attempt to do so. I ask that you remember and volunteer. She's saying, I know as journalists, you will critique everything that I say. I only hope that you remember you asked me to do this. Okay, so we know that she expects the audience, whom she's trying to reach, she expects the audience to not like what she's saying, despite the fact that, they invited her. Okay. So no audience, again, she directly says this, no audience knows better than the audience of journalists that the pursuit of truth and the articulation of it is the most delicate, hazardous, exacting, and inexact of tasks. So consequently, no audience is more forgiving to the speaker who fails to summarize. So we're hoping that the audience is forgiving. The only failure the audience would never excuse of any speaker is the failure to tell the truth. And I'm going to stop the highlighting here because we have a different color here. But this, again, tells the details of the audience, right? And then, we'll leave it at this for now. Okay, context. What is the time and place of this piece? What is happening in the world as it relates to the subject of the speech or the speaker-writer? Now, we don't know a whole lot in this regard other than the first thing, 1960. Okay, cool. Actually, I'm going to highlight speech made in 1960. Oh, not that. Let's not do this. Oh, it didn't. Okay. A speech made in 1960. Awesome, right? Time and place. We know that we're at the Women's National Press Club, which is why we saved that for later. Now, the other thing that we could mark here is a conclusion that is supported by the purpose and the audience and just some of the other language that's in here. When we're talking about what is happening in the world as it relates to the subject of the speech or the speaker-writer. Now, there's nothing in here that says what's going on other than it's a conference, right? But we can make some inferences based on what we're told about what she's saying about journalists, right? So she's saying that, hey, you need to deliver the facts. You can't just focus on these flashy stories, right? So we can infer regarding context that there is currently an issue with a large, with more and more journalists talking about or are printing sensationalist stories rather than the real facts. Now, this is something we infer based on what she's saying. There's not necessarily anything, there's not anything in black and white that you could identify, but you could infer that based on that, well, the beginning, actually, if I could highlight in two colors, I would. I could maybe underline in this color. I don't think I can underline in both. But you could maybe also, if you needed a piece of evidence for this, you could talk about this tidbit. So she went on to criticize the tendency of the American press for printing sensationalist stories, right? So that's what you could say for context. Now, in other speeches, you will have a more distinct context, like, you know, the assassination of Ronald Reagan, or not Ronald Reagan, JFK, something like this. Now, exigence. What is the spark or catalyst that moved the writer to act or write? How did the event impact the speaker or writer? Well, she was, and I'm going to change colors here. I am happy and flattered to be a guest of honor. Oh, we got two colors, but you know that's red. It's fine. So she's a guest of honor. They invited her. So why did she write this speech? They invited her to do so. There isn't another answer for this, right? She was a guest speaker. They asked her to come. And not only that, they asked her to criticize it because, you know, it says, I'm going to highlight this. The speaker who criticizes the weaknesses, pretensions, exposes the follies, sins of his listeners, even at their invitation, does not generally invoke an enthusiastic, no less friendly response. They invited her to come and talk about these problems. So that is also the exegesis. That's what got her to write about this specific thing. It's not a normal banquet where they just invited her, you know, to do whatever she wanted to do. No, they gave her a specific task. They're like, talk about this thing. That's all we're going to write for that. Let me change colors. Now, choices. What are rhetorical choices that the speaker makes in the speech? Think about overall structures, device, diction, syntax. Well, now here's where it gets a little tricky. It's really hard to highlight things like this unless there are clear metaphors or something along those lines. But when we're talking about choices, honestly speaking, in nonfiction, one of the best things that you can indicate is structure. So I'm going to stop the highlighter for a second and I will draw in a certain color. But I want to talk about this structure. She makes the choice to write in first person. Obviously, she's standing up she's speaking in first person because she's delivering a speech, right? But she also chooses to start or to have this almost a motif of humor in here. Because look, for the banquet speaker who criticized the weakness, even at their invitation, the delicate art of giving hell. I'm going to underline this. The delicate art. Actually, I could probably highlight that. No, stupid. But, hang on a second. So the delicate art of giving an audience hell. What is that? So the delicate art of giving hell is best left to the Billy Grahams and the Bishop Sheens. She says, I am not a volunteer for this subject tonight. She keeps reminding them, and I'm just going to take the pen and put dots next to these because some of them I can't underline. Here, that I hope. So I'll underline this in blue because I can't highlight in two colors. So I hope, so she's got this continuing use of humor, and I know there are definitely more examples in here that you could have highlighted. Excuse me. Now, when talking about these types of texts, it's not always the set literary devices that we indicate. In this case, I'm just gonna write humor. I'll put an H here for humor. Right? Hopefully you can remember. Let's see if I can get it on the bottom. Okay, it's a rough writing, but you get the idea. She uses humor, and she also uses reassurances. So look, she's like, in my perilous but earnest effort tonight, I must begin by saying that there is much wrong with the American press. There is also much right with it. And she ends by saying, U.S. daily press today is not inspiringly good. It's just far away. It is just far and away the best press in the world. So she also uses compliments, and I'm gonna write compliments down here. So she says, she acknowledges that there is some good. Actually, there's a lot of good. Okay, that'll do. Now, I told you I was going to talk about structure, but I wanted to talk about structure in terms of this cyclicalness. She uses this this criticism, then a compliment, then a criticism, then a compliment. She also kind of picks up on some potential counter arguments for what she's saying. So let's look at the text in particular. She talks about what good journalism is. So she like, here is also a really good example of it. So no audience knows better than an audience of journalists that the pursuit of truth and the articulation of it is the most delicate, hazardous, exacting, and inexact of tasks. Consequently, no audience is more forgiving to the speaker who fails to stumbles in his own pursuit of it. The only failure an audience can never excuse a speaker would be the failure to try truth. In my perilous but earnest effort to do so tonight, I must begin by saying that if there is much wrong with the American press, there's also much right with it. So these I guess it's not necessarily, it's a cyclical pattern of critique with humor. So she structures anything specific. So no audience anywhere should be more bored, indeed more bored by a speaker who tried to fawn on it, butter up, exaggerate virtues, play down, but you asked for it. And then no audience knows better, I hope. So we have a serious, like this part is serious, funny. Serious, funny. What is good? Serious. All this is serious. And then we got this little this little funny bit in here. And then my prayer listeners over to Sharon tonight. And then we get back to a serious note, but we're giving love, right? So honestly speaking, in terms of choices, those would be the rhetorical aspects that I would talk about. I would talk about her use of humor, and I would talk about her use of compliments, specifically relating here. Okay. And then humor. And again, sorry about the messy annotations. Okay. Now we're going to go to appeals, and the appeals are some of the easiest to identify.